Do you want to create amazing fantasy art? Perhaps you need some concept art for your fantasy character, a book cover, or some nice fantasy scenery. These Stable Diffusion models will help you bring your dream art to life. Number 5. A-ZOVYA RPG Artist Tools V2. If you need to generate complex character artwork or concept art with a lot of attention to tiny detail, then this is the model you should use. Looking at the sample images, you can see how much detail has been put into these artwork. Take this fantasy warrior. She has these tiny details in her clothes along with a nice background with a ton of detail. To generate such art, you need to properly follow the instructions on the page. Similar to the previous model, this model has its own VAE. The owner of this model was very kind enough to include it and even give us a detailed guide on how to use it. Kudos to that. Since I'm tired of creating fantasy girls, I'm going to create a skull warrior. He's going to have a skull face, red eyes, metal armor, and we're going to create it in the good old Dark Souls art style. And there you go. The colors are faded since I'm not using the proper VAE, but we have a decent skull warrior who looks like that boss from Terraria. We could definitely make this more scary by adding more keywords to the prompt, but this pretty much gives the effects we need. Just like before, let me add some more keywords to make the artwork more detailed and hit the generate button again. This time, there was a lot of creativity in the art. One warrior had this weird sigil in his chest, another gave the skull warrior abs, but I'm sure we don't want that. And this third one was perfect. Looked like one from those undead fantasy armies. Remember one thing, just because you type the same keywords doesn't mean you are going to get an art like the one you see in this picture. To generate art from this model with detail, you'll need to put some time and effort. To prove my point, let me copy the prompt that was used to create the female warrior, paste it into Stable Diffusion, and hit generate. We get 4 artwork, but none of them remotely looks like the artwork in the page. One has the head of a wolf, and the last one is a book cover, so keep that tip in mind. But with a little effort, you can generate great artwork. Number 4. Abyss Orange Mix 3. If you don't need photos in the usual photorealistic art style and instead need it in an anime art style, then this is the model you should be using. This model isn't specifically a fantasy model, but it can be really good when it comes to generating fantasy art. Just like before, there are a set of rules you should follow. In the model page, you'll find a list of negative prompts and even the number of steps you should use if you're using one of these samplers. So I'm going to head back to Stable Diffusion, change the sampling method to Karis, and generate a portrait of a white-haired witch standing in a castle background. Wait a few seconds, and there you go. It pretty much followed our prompt and gave us an image of a witch in a castle background. Now let's try again by adding some magical effects. Let me set the batch size to 4. Wait a few seconds, and boom! We got 4 nice artworks of witches. But if you look closely, you'll notice some flaws in each artwork. Some art has too many fingers in the hands, and the one that doesn't have hands in it has a castle on top of another castle. I also tried using the negative prompts provided in the page and tried generating an image of Ryugi Shiki from the anime Garden of Sinners. By the way, that's a great anime, check it out. Anyways, what I got was an artwork that followed my instructions when it came to the clothing and background, but not the character. None of these look like Shiki, but if you need a model to generate your concept art in anime style, then this is the one for you. And if you feel like the color of the images I've generated is a bit faded, that is because I'm not using a proper VAE. To change your VAE, you can go to Settings, Stable Diffusion, and change the VAE via the SD VAE box. You can find some free VAEs in Stable Diffusion too. Number 3, LYRIEL. LYRIEL is a newer model that made its way into Civet AI and quickly got popular among the community. There are a lot of fantasy portraits designed using this art style, but personally for me, this was really good at creating nice fantasy sceneries. Let me prove this by creating both a portrait and a fantasy scenery. I'm going to keep the same keywords as before and generate a fantasy knight with short black who is screaming angrily in the background. I'm also going to add some additional effects like a nice wind effect, make the whole scenery happen in the evening. Now pay attention to the description of the model. You can make artwork in the usual sampler, but these settings are what works the best. So I'm going to change the sampler to DPM plus 2M Karis and keep the steps to 35. Image size is the same, and I hit generate. The image is, well, pretty good, but her face is bad. So I take the Restore Faces checkbox and regenerate 4 artworks this time. Now their faces look a little better. Not good, but better than the last one. This first image looks especially nice, since they added some soldiers to the background too. Now if I change the expression to frowning and make sure it doesn't add anything NSFW, and hit that generate button, I get much better results. There are still some issues with their eyes, but this first image looks really nice. Remember when I said this is good with scenery? To prove my point, here's a prompt to generate a scenery with an island sanctuary of an ancient fallen kingdom. I also need some effects like reflections in the water. Let's see if this model can handle such complex effects. And there you go. These are almost perfect. Look how nicely the reflection effects are added on the water, and how nice the overall scenery is. This is all all because I added keywords like ray tracing and photorealistic, raw photo to my prompt. So if you need some beautiful scenery, now you know which model to use. Number 2, DREAMSHAPER. DREAMSHAPER isn't created specifically as a fantasy model, but you can generate some nice fantasy artwork using this model. It is great when creating portraits or character concept art. To prove my point, let me go back to Stable Diffusion, load the model, and then generate an artwork of a fantasy princess. I specifically want a fantasy princess with long blonde hair with blue eyes, wearing a crown, dressed in a royal dress with a diamond necklace, and smiling while we have a background of a castle. And there you go. It pretty much followed all the details I needed, even the diamond necklace. But if you feel like this art is a bit too simple, you can add a few prompts to have more detail. These are some keywords I use to generate more photorealistic art, and if I regenerate the art, you can see we get a much more beautiful and photorealistic picture. Let's set the batch count to 4 and regenerate so we can see some variations of the same artwork. There you go. We got some nice fantasy princesses. We even got a shot of her looking back, even though we specified we need a shot from the front, but we can correct this by increasing the weight of the prompt. If you think the dress is too revealing because of the open midriff, all that you need to do is type in the word midriff in the negative prompts and regenerate. And here's the final result. Now they look more like fantasy princesses. To test this out further, I also tried generating the same art of the model page by following the prompts. This time we had a little magic effect with butterflies around the portrait. And even though the first two artwork had their issues, it improved during the second generation. Number 1, Rev Animated. I spoke about this model in my previous video as well, but I need to mention this again because this is the best one I've found when it comes to generating fantasy art. All the previous models had 1 or 2 flaws, and even though this model isn't perfect, this is the closest that comes to perfection. As usual, I'll try out by giving my own prompt for a witch with long purple hair in a royal ballroom. This time, let's spice things up a little bit by trying to add a few magical effects to my artwork. Wow, look how nice that was. It's definitely leaning a bit towards the NSFW side, but at least it pretty much generated what we want. The background does look a bit weird though because of all the cables and lights, but that's because of the lights keyword we added to the prompt. Try generating another one and it's definitely getting way more racy, so we add the keyword NSFW to the negative prompts. And since there are no magical effects, I increase the weight of the magic effects and fantasy keywords by selecting them both and pressing Ctrl and the up arrow key. Change batch count to 4 and hit generate again. Nice, look at that. Now we got some nice magic effects going on in our hands. This second image looks perfect. You can also see how all these 4 images have closely related faces and styles. I've tested this out a couple of times and I can definitely say this model is pretty good when generating similar artwork. For example, if I copy the prompt of the first artwork of the main page, paste it, and then generate it on my computer, you can see we got something very close to the original image. Look at this first one. That looks really nice. So that's 5 models you can use to create amazing fantasy art in Stable Diffusion. As usual, hit that like button if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. That's it for today, AI artists, and I'll see you all in the next video.